What if witches from the famous witch trials really existed, and how would their existence change the history? This will be answered in this video. But firstly, let's talk about what were the witch trials and some basic rules for the scenario. The witch trials were happening since the 15th century all the way to 18th century, with peak in 17th century during the Protestant Reformation and the Counter-Reformation. They were happening all around Europe and later in the New World, with most prominent locations being Salem in America and the Holy Roman Empire in Europe. Responsible for this were the Inquisition and Catholic Church, and most of the victims were women, and the method of execution was burning at the stake. For the rules, let's say that their powers are limited, and they don't form any large organizations, just a bunch of old women who in their free time independently of each other discover that magic exists, and they start to learn it. The first changes would be seen all the way in 14th century. The people would be really surprised that the witches they are burning really survived, and many of them would meet their revenge. There would be several independent incidents, and soon the word about these events would spread. We can be sure that after a while the news would arrive not at Vatican, but Avignon. Now, the entire scenario could be changed by two things: the year of these events and the speed of the information spreading through Europe. That's because we could prevent the Western Schism, where we got 2 and later 3 popes. The schism began in year 1378, and one of the first witch trials was with Alice K. Teller in Ireland, and that happened in year 1324. If we assume that she would show her powers, we have enough time for the information to spread. This would cause more witch trials that would happen much earlier than in our history, and it would be enough time to stop this Western Schism, which would be stopped because of hysteria and people being scared of the witches. With more witch trials, more innocent people would die as well, to them being falsely accused of witchcraft. Meanwhile, the mass hysteria would step in, and many people would start to panic. This would happen around the transition into 15th century. The Pope would need to intervene, so organizations like the Inquisition would be created earlier. This organization would quickly spread around Europe and help solve this problem. With this, we have made church much more powerful. We can expect that all of the witches who would survive this onslaught would swiftly run or hide, as their powers is not so big that they could stand up against the entire society. Sooner or later, the trials against innocent people would stop, and the rest of the society would notice how the grip of religion and the church would strengthen. Part of the taxes would went to church, they would start to be corrupt, etc. This happened in our timeline as well, and who sides together with the Protestant revolutions have followed. But what would happen in this timeline, with the church being so rooted in Europe? I believe that rulers of countries, kings, dukes, etc., they all might fight the church with the one thing church really hates, and that's magic. Sooner or later, people would ask about witchcraft in a scientific way. I expect that it could be around the time of Renaissance, because we have done nothing to stop it, and to stop the fall of Eastern Roman Empire and the influx of intellectuals into Italy, which was one of the main catalysts of the Renaissance. At the beginning, these people would start their research in a secret, knowing that if they would be discovered, they would be burned alive. It would take quite some time for them to discover a living witch who could help them, but with the support of a king or a royal, it could be doable. This would slowly lead into a conflict with the church, something similar to religious wars and 30 Years' War in our reality, but in this one it would be much worse. Church is much more powerful, and it's rooted deeply not only inside countries, but inside people's minds, and it probably has its own military force as well. You might see that the countries do not have the strength to win in this timeline, but they have one ace in their sleeves, and that's the magic. And once again, this depends on the timing. I would expect that the Protestant Revolution would begin in the same way. Maybe it would happen a little earlier, but I am sure that they would spread faster, mainly between the aristocracy. And because we have not changed the dynasties in a big manner, I would expect that during this time, so during 15th and 16th century, the royals would be the same, so at least one big kingdom, and that is England, would join on the side of Protestants. But with this successful revolution, more countries would follow. I also believe that during these times, the aristocrats would successfully and at least partly master the magic that was used by witches, and the rest of the witches would become advisors to the monarchs, something like in The Witcher. Also, Pope would get stroke because he would probably need to sign so many excommunications. The war would begin at early 17th century, the same way as 30 Years' War began. And because it is quite difficult to tell who will win, I will divide this scenario into two: a Catholic victory and a Protestant victory. Let's look on the Protestant victory first. Thanks to their effort to persuade the people to refuse Catholicism and support them, their military strength would grow, and thanks to their leaders, they would win. But it would be impossible to destroy Catholicism, so they would just severely weaken it. In this reality, areas like Germany, Britain, Scandinavia, and part of Central and Eastern Europe with north of France and Benelux would be Protestant, whilst others would remain Catholic. These countries would focus on the magic, so instead of some scientific progress and revolution, which we've got in our reality, there would be progress in the understanding of magic changing the world forever. In a Catholic victory, things would be different. Whilst the Protestants couldn't destroy Catholicism, the Catholics can destroy Protestants if they invested enough into it, which they would. The Catholics would win several battles and regain all the Protestant areas before the population converted to it. In this timeline, people would be oppressed, the Protestants could flee into America, which would become the head of science in the world much earlier, leaving far behind with the fanatics being scared of new things and science in Europe. Because it is impossible to continue this scenario without describing the magic more deeply, I will end it here. If you enjoyed this video, you can give a like and subscribe to my channel. I've moved to a new schedule and I will try to release one long video a month and maybe try to experiment more. With this, I will see you at the next video. Salvete!